I like this sweater. When I put it on, a bunch of fluffies came off, so hopefully you don't see that on camera too much. I just saw one go by. Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Kendra, Reading with Kendra on YouTube, and I'm so excited to be filming this video because we are doing my January wrap-up video, and I feel like I've had so many thoughts about these books, but I've been waiting to do this January wrap-up, so I'm excited. It's going to be a long video, so get a snack and also be prepared for spoilers. I'm not 100% sure if every month it's going to be the same, but I know for these books specifically, I really want to go into details about the plot and the themes because they were just all so interesting, so beautiful, so intriguing, and so very different that I really kind of want to dissect each one. I usually do spoiler-free reviews, or if there is a spoiler, I will put a warning, but for this video specifically, I will be going in depth for each of these books. Obviously, at the beginning of each segment, I'm going to mention what book I'm talking about, so if there's certain books in here that you have read that you want to see that portion of the video, but then there's books in here that you haven't read, you can jump to see each book, and I'm excited. So all I gotta say is that, wow, January was such a strong reading month. And I'm not even talking about how many books I read. I read 4 books this month, which I'm really proud of myself for doing, but I'm talking about just the quality of the books. The crazy thing is the first book I'm going to be talking about in this video might be my favorite read of the year. So the first book I'm going to be talking about, I don't have on me right now because I did borrow it from my mother-in-law, but it's The Woman by Kristen Hanna. I did a collaboration with other book talkers talking about what books you should read in 2026, so you should definitely go check out that video. I'm going to actually link it below, but I talk about The Woman in that video. But I also want to talk about it in this video because truly, as of right now, it is in the top spot of my favorite books of the year so far. So The Woman was my very first Kristen Hanna book. I know she's extremely popular. I don't think I've seen really a bad thing about any of her books. So I had high expectations, I guess, in the sense that it would be quality writing. However, I was a little bit hesitant going into this book because I don't typically lean towards historical fiction. Another point too is that I'm not typically a big fan of war stories in general. I've never really liked war movies. Or at least they're not really my favorite kind of movies. I'll watch them. My husband loves a war movie, but they're just not the kind of movie I gravitate towards usually. So The Woman was kind of an interesting choice, but I gifted my mother-in-law The Nightingale, and then she had The Woman and was like, oh, would you like to read this book? So I was like, okay. And I took it, and let me tell you, that book, I don't want to say changed my life or anything, but it opened my eyes to how, I guess, beautiful you can write a war story. So I'm going to go a little bit into the plot of the book now. Definitely going to be some spoilers here. I'm not going to try to give away like too much, but I will be talking about what happens a bit in this book. So The Woman is set during the Vietnam War years, and the story opens with them hosting a party for Francis's brother because he is going off to war. And at that party, Frances has a conversation with one of her brother's friends. That's a pretty casual conversation, but also a conversation that really changes, I guess, the trajectory of her life, where basically her brother's friend was saying that women can be heroes. This really sticks with her. And her brother goes to war and is killed at war. It happens pretty early on in the book, so I mean, it is a spoiler. And keep in mind, during this time, I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this. During this time, it was not, I guess it was more frowned upon for women to be ambitious and kind of have these big careers. Like, our main goal was to get married, have babies, be a housewife, which I'm the type of person that if that's like what you want to, even in this day and age, if that's what you want to do, go for it. I am a very like, whatever makes you happy, go for it. But it was just during a time where like that's all they saw women as being, and they didn't want us to be like striving in other careers, and there was more of a negative connotation to it, whereas now, like, if you want to be a stay-at-home mom or a housewife, there's no shame in that. Now in this generation, we've completely flipped that, and I feel like people are like, yes, be a stay-at-home mom, like if you have the power to do that, why not? I mean, I'm sure there's some people out there that will judge you. I mean, there's people out there that will judge you for anything, but I don't think there's as much of a negative connotation to that. But just back in that time, it was women have to do this because we don't want women in these like powerful roles. We want women to be just at home cooking, cleaning. Can't remember exactly what she was doing at the hospital at the beginning of the book, but she was working at a hospital, and even Frankie's mom at the time was like, you don't even have to be working, you should be spending your time going to find a husband and settling down. So it was really like women weren't encouraged to be in the work world. So after her brother dies, Frances starts to think about that conversation she had with her brother's friend about women can be heroes, and she decides to enlist in the army because she thinks it's going to make her parents proud, because it made her parents so proud that her brother went to go fight. And I think she also was at a phase too where she was just trying to figure out what she wanted to do, because she was the type of person that didn't see herself just getting married and having babies and that was that. Frances, I feel like you learn from the start, this is not really what she envisions for herself, so she enlists in the war, and it does not float well. Her parents are not proud. If anything, they seem very embarrassed by it. They think she's like crazy for doing it, but it was too late to turn back. So the first half of the story is Frances at war. You get a lot of really interesting and beautiful storylines during this time, and I think Kristen Hanna does such a good job at painting a picture of what war looked like during this time. I didn't know much about the Vietnam War, to be honest, going into this book. I was so fascinated to read about it, and it made me want to look into it more after the book. So she goes to war. She meets two women there who become really good friends of hers. So there's a huge theme of friendship in the book, not just at war, but after the war. You get some romance there, and also you get a lot of heavy stuff. So going into this book, you should definitely read trigger warnings, because she's a nurse at war. So you can only imagine what kind of things Kristen Hanna writes about during the war. You hear a lot about the blood and the gore of it. You can expect kind of horrific things there. So the first half of the book is her time at war, her experience there, friendships she makes, connections she makes, and then you get to see letters between her and her mom. Basically, it's letters between her and her mom, but her mom will mention her dad and stuff, but her dad had never directly sent her a letter. And then what I appreciate about this book is the second half of this book. Originally, I was going to give this book a 4 because of the second half of this book. I thought it kind of dragged out a bit too long and wasn't as exciting. I think I was just so invested in kind of the war story that it felt almost like a little too slow pace. But after sitting with this book for a while, I think it needed that, and it made sense. I understand why Kristen Hanna did it, and I appreciate it a lot more, which is why I ended up bumping it up to a 5 stars. So the second half of the book looks at how society treated women after the war, and not only a woman, actually how society treated just people that went to war in general. If you do any kind of research about the Vietnam War, you'll find information about kind of what America was like at the time. But specifically, it looked at how Frances really dealt with like this PTSD, and how a lot of people didn't even consider her a part of the Vietnam War because she didn't technically fight in combat. There were so many moments where she tried to seek help and go into these therapy groups to talk about the experience, and they would literally kick her out, which was absolutely terrible. So the second half of this book really looks at the journey of how badly she was mentally coming back from the war. I feel like when Frances comes back, you don't really realize how kind of bad she's doing mentally, and the way it kind of unravels is really jarring and emotional, because she seems kind of like, yeah, I'm back into society, whatever. You just start to see it unravel. She struggles with like alcohol and like depression and PTSD, and it's so sad to see that she wasn't able to get help from just the community around her. Basically, her parents too, when she got back, almost wanted her to completely forget about the war and like not even talk about it. It was like an unspoken thing in their family. So, you know, you can only imagine how that made Frances feel, because she was going through all this stuff. And there's like more to the story that I didn't like go into when I was kind of just explaining this, but like a lot of stuff happens during the war, and like romantic relationships and friendships and all that. So it was such an interesting way for it all to unravel, but then a beautiful outcome in the end. And this is why for the second half of the book, friendship was also a big part of the first half of the book, but really friendship was a huge part of the second half of the book. Her friends were really there for her and were there to support her, especially during times that her parents weren't really there for her, didn't understand her. Overall, this book was so good. It really had a lot of themes to it. It was a historical fiction, a war story, heavy topics on friendship, heavy topics on romance, topics on PTSD and like struggling, a lot of history. And I think this is a perfect book for someone who doesn't really read historical fiction and is trying to get into the genre. I thought reading this book was a really simple read. I didn't really struggle with too much of the wording or the phrasing of things, which was really nice, because that was one thing that actually kind of intimidated me about historical fiction, was I thought that some of the wording would just be hard for me to comprehend. It just captures your attention and pulls you in, and you get so invested in the characters and the story, and it's just so well written. And yeah, overall, I gave The Woman a 5 stars, and I am really happy I started with that book at the beginning of the year, because it was incredible. And it definitely didn't put me in a reading slump, because the next book I started right after. So the second book that I read was Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid. And so this is going to be an interesting review, because I might have a controversial opinion on this book. So I've read The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, I've read Daisy Jones and the Six, I've read Malibu Rising, and I enjoyed all 3 of those books. I love Taylor Jenkins Reid's books so much, and her writing I'm always really invested in. And I will say, for Atmosphere, same thing goes. I think her writing is beautiful. Her storytelling is absolutely beautiful. As much as I love a spicy romance, she writes like very dramatic love stories, but not heavy on the spice. It's more about the relationship building, I guess, and not just like sexy scenes of it all. So it's a refreshing thing to have books like that as well. I love a balance. Like, I'll read a spicy romance, but I also like books that are like super heavily on spice. Atmosphere was at the top of so many people's reading list last year, and the reason why I had avoided it for so long was because, it might be a controversial opinion, but I don't really have an interest in space. I never really did, to be honest, and this sounds crazy. I just like could care kind of less about it. I don't know. I've just never had a desire for it. I weirdly, like, if anything, I have more interest in the underwater world than outer space. So judge me if you want. I'm just being honest, and I feel like I wanted to make that point so you can understand why I'm reviewing this book the way I am. So of course, going into Atmosphere, I knew that it was going to be obviously heavily focused on astronauts. So I went into it with an open mind, and I didn't want to let my opinions on space affect this story too much. And I think I did a good job at judging this book from, I guess, more of a technical standpoint and a storytelling standpoint versus the topics of this book. I really loved the characters in this book. I really liked the way that Taylor writes in general, and I think she's a beautiful storyteller. So one reason why I think this book maybe felt a little flat for me was because, so I recently watched Lost in Starlight on Netflix. I've talked about this movie in the past, but not the same story as Atmosphere, but there's a bit of similarity to it, and I had just kind of watched that movie not too long ago, so I kind of wonder if it's because I've watched a movie that was kind of similar to Atmosphere. Maybe that's why it kind of fell a little flat. I was so much more invested in the chapters that were, you know, Joan and Vanessa hanging out, or going on dates, or their social lives outside of the missions they were working on. Basically, all the chapters that took place on the mission were not my favorite. And then all the chapters that were outside the mission were my favorite. So that's obviously telling that I am still not that intrigued by space. I honestly would read those chapters a lot faster so I could just get to the other stuff. So that's why I kind of rated it a 3.75, because I did like the story. I like the characters, the writing's beautiful. It just wasn't my cup of tea in terms of the topics of the story. I just thought the space stuff was kind of boring and not interesting to me, but that's a personal opinion. If you're a fan of Taylor, like, 100% read this book, because the writing won't disappoint you. It just wasn't my cup of tea in terms of the topics. 3.75, still extremely strong beginning to my reading year though. So the third book I read was a graphic novel called Squad. Basically, the description said it was Pretty Little Liars meets Teen Wolf. If you know me, I love Pretty Little Liars. It's basically probably my #1 comfort show of all time. I'm actually doing a rewatch now. I'm on season 7, so my rewatch is almost over and I can't believe it. But I am kind of a creature of habit sometimes. I have a rotation of shows. Like, every year I basically choose like 1 or 2 of my comfort shows and rewatch it. So I'm always constantly watching a comfort show. I watch a lot of new things as well, but I always will have a comfort show. So for example, like my husband, The Office is basically always on if he's watching TV. For me, it's between like Pretty Little Liars, Glee, Gossip Girl, Orange is the New Black, and a lot of reality shows too, like Hell's Kitchen too. I always will like rewatch a season. Anyways, that I just thought everything, I guess, share that. But Squad was apparently Pretty Little Liars meets Teen Wolf. I've seen Pretty Little Liars many of times, never seen Teen Wolf, but I can imagine that it's probably Twilight-esque high school, but like werewolves involved is probably an accurate assumption of what that show is. So it was a graphic novel. I read it on my Kindle. I don't have my Kindle on me right now, but I really loved this book. I love the art style of it. I zoomed through it. I read it in a day. Sometimes I forget that graphic novels, because there's not a huge chunk of words on each page, I just zoomed through it, but I really liked it. Basically, the story followed this girl who came to this new school, and she becomes friends with the popular group of girls, and turns out these popular girls are werewolves. So it follows this new girl and her new friend group and kind of like their lives as werewolves as well, but then also their lives at school. So basically, werewolves, high school drama, and then a murder happens in the town as well. So that's, I can see where the Pretty Little Liars plays into it, and the Pretty Little Liars also plays into just like the main friend group. I'm trying to incorporate more types of books and different types of genres this year. So I read my first graphic novel last year, so I definitely wanted to incorporate more of them this year, especially because they're a great piece of literature to read if I think you're in a reading slump, or you're not looking for something super like text heavy. Like sometimes I am in the mood to read something, but I don't want to read a standard novel. I love visuals. I'm a visual person, and graphic novels feel like are a perfect cleanser if you say have read two like really heavy books. Reading The Women in Atmosphere back to back, I was like, okay, I kind of want to read something fun, something not super serious, and graphic novels I think are the perfect book to do that. And you can really, I mean, if you are trying to reach like big reading goals and that's important to you, incorporate some graphic novels. They're great. They're shorter, and it's just like a fun, different kind of book you can read. I'm gonna give it a 4. I actually would have given it a 5. I want it to be longer. I thought it was cut kind of short, so I wish that it was longer, but I gave it a 4, and I highly recommend it. I'm excited to read more graphic novels. Okay, and then the final book I have, and I think this will probably be the last time I talk about this book, because I feel like I've had to mention this book so many times in the last month, but we are finally going to talk about Beartown and my overall thoughts on it. So not in my last video, but I think the video before, whenever I posted my last what I read in a week, I did share a lot of live thoughts on Beartown in that video, so I won't be going to like super in depth in terms of the plot, and this will just kind of be my overall thoughts. But I think I gave Beartown a 4 out of 5. Here's the thing, I was talking to another friend who read this book who loves this book. I was obviously invested in this book from the first page. If you've read Beartown, you know how it starts, and I was like, who are these people in the forest? I'm not a huge fan of the way that, like, this sounds so morbid to say, but like, if you're gonna start a book by saying that there was a person in the forest with a gun to another person's head, I'm expecting this this to be like a murder, right? You know, I expect this, especially because the way they built in the story, I'm expecting this big reveal of like who these people are in the forest and someone to die, which again, I know sounds morbid, but hear me out. That's just how I was expecting the book to go. So you can imagine how like more disappointed I was to find out that the people that were in the forest, no one got shot in the forest. Like, yes, that's the scenario was painted how they said at the beginning of the book, but no one actually got shot. And here's the thing, after talking to my friend and also reflecting, I understand why they didn't do that, because if Maya had shot Kevin, I feel like there wouldn't have been as much justice, because she would have went to prison obviously for killing somebody, and I know that wouldn't have been as effective. So I understand why they did it that way, but that was like the reason why it didn't get a 5-star, because I think I was just expecting something different. Like, I really wanted there to be like a really big reveal, and it might have fallen a little flat for me. Overall though, Beartown is an extremely, extremely beautifully written book. I am not a hockey person. I grew up in a household where like hockey was on the TV a lot. I love watching a hockey game. I love sports. I'm a sports watcher. I love watching like a basketball game or a hockey game. I love watching the Olympics. I love watching sports. I think when you grow up in Ottawa too, or like probably anywhere in Canada, we're a hockey country. So I can appreciate hockey, but I was never like a hockey kid. But the way Fredrik Backman writes was so beautiful. Like the way he wrote about Beartown, I love how everyone comes together for this like small little hockey team in this small little town. So I feel like obviously a big topic of the book was hockey in general. They are going to the semifinals. There was all that build up for that. But then of course you have Maya's storyline, which if you watch my other video, you'll see my live thoughts of that. And like I mentioned in that video, I was so surprised. So I knew Beartown was going to be a heavy book. I heard that it was an emotional book, but I never thought that there was going to be a sexual assault storyline in this. That's just never what came into my head when I heard about Beartown. And I fell for Fredrik Backman's writing because Kevin's character at the beginning, I was like, oh my gosh, he's Mr. Popular, but he's so misunderstood. All he wants is love from his parents, and he's so loved by his like classmates and friends, but all he wants is the love from his parents, and he doesn't get that. And Maya's going to come into his life and show him this love, and they are going to build this beautiful relationship. And honestly, my thoughts were that Amat, because he also had a crush on Maya, it was going to be like a love triangle, and he and Kevin were going to end up being in the forest. So you can only imagine my disappointment and also rage when the party stuff started to unfold. That was really shocking for me and not what I was expecting. So you have that side of the story as well. So I feel like Fredrik Backman did a really good job at kind of balancing those two storylines, like starting off with kind of just building out this hockey town and the community. I think anyone, even if you don't like hockey, would really like this book because I think he just does a really good job at writing it from like the community perspective. There's a lot about kind of the culture of hockey, if that makes sense. But from a person that doesn't really know much about like the culture of hockey, like I appreciated this book. I just think he wrote it so well that I was able to kind of understand it as someone who's just not as invested in that environment, I guess is the word. But overall, I loved Beartown. The Woman and Beartown, I would put both up there at the top of like just really, really good writing. Like The Woman was beautiful writing. Beartown was almost like poetic writing to me. Like there was something very beautiful, and the way that it flowed was just remarkable to me. And I understand why people love Fredrik's work so much because I don't know, you just feel this the connection to the writing. I don't know how else to explain it. I just really thought it was so good. Overall, really like Beartown. I feel like I rambled about each book for so long. Hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what's on your February reading list, or let me know what your favorite read in January was, and I will see you next Sunday. Bye!